Welcome back to this week's episode of Lindsey Byrd and Writing is Hard. Today's episode goes over writing and drawing a scary middle grade graphic novel. We talk about identity, how to target your audience, and things to keep in mind while creating that graphic novel. I hope you enjoy. Today's author interview is with graphic novelist Stan Yan. Stan is a Denver-based, award-winning, first-generation American-born Chinese writer, illustrator, character artist, and instructor. He is also a recovering stockbroker who has always been a little too fascinated with creepy things, but there's nothing to be afraid of. Nothing at all. Stan helped co-fund the Squidworks Comic Creator Cooperative, was a board member of the Colorado Alliance of Illustrators, and is currently the co-regional advisor for the Rocky Mountain chapter of the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators, and he is a co-founding professor of the Cuttlefish Academy Kid Lit Art School. His most recent graphic novel is The Many Misfortunes of Eugenia Wang, which is out on the 30th of September 2025. Its backup book blurb reads, 12-year-old Eugenia Wang has never celebrated her birthday on her actual birthday, April 4th, because of her mom's belief in the Chinese superstition that 4 is an unlucky number. And that's not the only thing mom's strict about. She won't let Eugenia go to a summer comic art camp because she thinks art is a waste of time. This year, Eugenia is determined to defy her mom by applying for the camp, having her party on her actual birthday, and inviting her super cute crush while she's at it, too. But when Eugenia gets hit in the head with a sneaker during PE, she starts getting unnerving visions of impending doom about her upcoming birthday. It might be the after effects of her head injury, or maybe she's just anxious about turning 13. As the visions get worse, even affecting her artwork, Eugenia suspects an unseen force may be sending her messages. If she's haunted after all, Eugenia will have to figure out why before it's too late. But even more horrifying, she may have to do the unthinkable, admit that her mom was right. So just to start us off, what inspired you to write this story?
Actually, it was kind of a bucket list item for myself. It was all um, me saying, that I wanted to write and illustrate a comic that actually scared me because I feel like even though there's a rich history of horror comics out there, um, they just never really scared me as much as movies or novels, because, movies, they've got the ability to add audio and the editors edit it in at the pace that they want you to watch it at. And you can't force people to do that with a comic. And with the novel, my very visual imagination does a lot of the heavy lifting. And so a lot of times when I read a comic, I'm like, this monster's not really as scary as I would have made it. And so that was my challenge for myself when I originally started writing this story. And one of the things that I found was that in a lot of horror entertainment, I thought some of the scariest things always involved a child character. So I'm like, okay, well maybe I need to make my protagonist a child. So I didn't really go into this intending on making a children's book. It just, happened by accident more than anything.
When you're trying to design a book that's meant to be scary, but it's also a children's book. I imagine there's things you're not allowed to do on page because your audience is a younger audience. So how do you evoke those feelings of fear without leaning into some of the more adult versions of fear that might include gore, for instance, which I'm not sure how
Right.
much gore you're allowed to give to a child.
Yeah, and that was actually kind of something I'd thought about ahead of time, even before I thought of making this a children's book, is that, my problem with horror comics is they showed you too much. And so I felt like, especially like in old movies where they didn't have the special effects abilities to do all of the grotesque and gratuitous things they wanted to, they were still able to make them scary movies. And I was like, well, maybe I can borrow something from that because when you've got a static page, maybe it's more effective to show things by not showing them. having them happen off panel. And so I kind of went into drawing this with that mindset.
That's kind of an interesting mindset to have because, as you said, you're drawing nothing. Like, how do you go about like saying, all right, I'm not going to show what's actually happening, but I'm going to draw something anyway? Like, where's that balance?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, because we're working in a static medium, we're making our readers do a lot of our work anyway, because they're the ones that kind of have to figure out what happens between the panels. So just because I don't show it doesn't mean that it's not going through the reader's minds. Something Scott McCloud in Understanding Comics talks about, um, you know, pretty extensively, something he calls closure. A lot of what we do from a storyboard standpoint is a lot like movie storyboarding. Um, but how we lead a reader from one panel to another um, can be aided by using conventions of movies and storyboarding. But in the end, we still have to hope that we did enough work and showed enough to make sure that our readers didn't get lost.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really important thing to do because you are playing with multiple mediums. I mean, as a person who only writes prose narrative, I don't have the luxury of having a visual all the time where I have to actually describe it. And if I don't describe it, someone might not even get it, where you have that balance where you have the visual, but you also have the story and the dialogue. For you, when you're creating your comic, what do you decide? All right, this needs to be a visual, this can be in dialogue, this doesn't need to be here, it can just be implied.
I think, for me, it's always been very intuitive. My earliest memory is of having being able to hold a pencil. I was drawing the same character, doing different things in these boxes that later on I found out were panel borders. They're called panel borders. I was doing comics before I even realized, and that's the way I've always seen stories. So, you know, you've probably heard, you want to show and not tell. Well, I've always kind of been in that camp because by default, because I'm drawing things, I am showing more so than I'm telling. So I do notice that when I do comics, I tend to be a lot less verbose than other comic artists as far as expositional captions, for instance. Um, and typically when I do use captions, they're very narrative in a first person point of view type of way.
For this
So
story,
it's,
sorry, go
oh,
ahead.
so go ahead, go ahead.
For this story in particular, you said what came first is you wanted the idea of scaring somebody. Did the art come to you first, or did the story of what Eugenia would eventually go through start coming first?
The story didn't. Originally, it was not even Eugenia because um, my original main character was not Asian at all. So for me, it was uh, there were a lot of things that changed. The story went through six major revisions, and one of which was at a time where I, s- I started reading a lot more um, books by especially Chinese American authors. But before that, I I can't say that I was really well read uh, in novels and actually any kidlit by Asian American authors. So when I actually produced my first children's book, a picture book called "There's a Zombie in the Basement," I the main character was inspired by my son, who one day, when he was 3, he wouldn't come down to my basement studio for some reason, and because of all of the zombie artwork hanging from my walls, because I'm a zombie caricature artist. That's kind of my claim to fame on the comic book convention circuit for many many years. Um, and but when I drew the book, even though it was inspired by my son, who looks like me, I drew him as a redhead kid for whatever reason. And I never even considered it, you know, drawing my main character as being Asian. I had a lot of rationalizations behind why that happened. But in the end, I just hadn't even thought about it. It was just almost reflexive. And then so when I started reading books by Andrea Wang and Grace Lin and Lisa Yi and Kelly Yang and saw that, oh, you can make protagonists, Chinese American. Um, then I was like, well, why didn't I make my character look like my son? And and then I started reflecting on my childhood and the only book in my school library I can remember having Chinese characters in it was The Five Chinese Brothers, which wasn't a story that exactly made me proud of being Chinese. And so I was like, oh, so maybe this is what they talk about when they're talking about having representation in literature and what that could do to me as a 40-some-year-old adult even, where I never even considered representing myself for who I am. And so while I was writing, at that time, The Many Misfortunes of Eugenia Wang was a story called Olfactory Memory. And then I got a so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and make my main character, who at that time was named Morty Rose, Morty Chen. And so he was going to be Chinese. And then after I got a portfolio review from an editor during the pandemic, um, and got her to request a full manuscript, and she told me, this is really great and everything, but I think there's too many things going on, and so she made me take the olfactory thing out, and it originally was based in 1981. So she was like, just make it contemporary. And so I got to revise and what's called an R&R in the industry, a revise and resubmit. I'm like, okay, I'm going to redo this. But in the interim, I'd been taking There's a Zombie in the Basement for to schools for author visits for several years, and librarians kept telling me, talking to me about scary children's books. And they're like, oh yeah, kids love them, but there's not enough books scary books for girls. And I'm like, well, maybe if I gender flip my main character, then there'll be a scary book out there that girls will want to read. And so that's how Morty Chen became Eugenia Wang. So I don't know if that answers your original question, but
It does, and I have so many questions that now I'm just trying to figure out which one to start with. Um, I think on the topic of identity, something I'd be curious of when you were first learning how to draw or learning how to create comics, were there people in your life who were giving you any type of, here's how you draw an Asian character, here's how you draw a Black character, or was it just purely white coded the whole way through?
yeah, it was just me. I mean, my family moved to a very white suburban suburb of Denver when I was less than a year old. So that's where I grew up, not around any Asian culture whatsoever. So pretty much the Asian culture that I had was in the household. So there in this book, there is some Cantonese, spoken Cantonese in there, but most of it is just things words I remember from growing up in the household. Mostly food or getting yelled at by my mom. So things like that.
When you started creating your Asian characters now, were there things that you felt like you really wanted to emphasize, things that were important to you? Just like, you know what, this is important. This is how I can identify this character, and something that I wish I had seen more of when I was younger.
Um, Not particularly. I mean, I wanted it to kind of reflect more of my own family, and I think that's one of the things that also was holding me back through the years, even when I started reading a lot of literature by Chinese American authors, is um, a lot of what do you call it? Uh, Imposter syndrome. Like, am I Chinese enough? Is what I'm writing representative of my culture as a whole? When really my culture is just me and my upbringing and what I've done. And I've, since um, heard from several different authors um, about a quote by none of them about how if you write your book to be so specific to yourself, it becomes universal. And I think a lot of that is because, when you write specifically based on your own experiences, the argument is it becomes more authentic that way. And the authenticity is what makes something for anyone that maybe hasn't necessarily lived through your own life experiences, um, it becomes universal to them as well, and they can still relate to whether it's just relationship experiences. And one of the good examples of that is one of the comps when we were pitching this book was it was, Turning Red meets Goosebumps. So if you're familiar with the movie Turning Red, um, it's about it's a coming of age story about I guess a Chinese Canadian character who turns into a red panda right around the time where, you would expect her maybe to be going through puberty or something. And um, one of my friends that teaches with me at the Cuttlefish Academy, Lily Williams, who's co-author and illustrator of a graphic novel called Go with the Flow about um, period equity. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're going to love this movie if you haven't already seen it because it has a lot of uh, metaphors for menstruation. And um, but for me, the thing that I really connected with was just the Chinese the relationship between the mother and the daughter, which even though I wasn't the daughter in the family, my older sister, who Eugenia is loosely based on, um, she had a very contentious relationship with my mom. And I saw that a lot in Turning Red. And as I was writing this book, that seeped into the character relationship quite a bit. Um, and so anyway, I was like, yeah, I need to talk to Lily about this movie because even though we probably didn't connect to the same parts of this movie, I think that we both would she probably loved it as much as I did, which she did.
Now, you said earlier that you also connected to what a librarian told you about how there aren't a lot of scary comic books for girls. When you were writing this particular character, you did choose to change the gender. Was there anything that you put into it specifically to target that female audience beyond having the female main character?
Um, I mean, I think that like mainly the contentious relationships and the things that I think I mean, again, just based on what I've been witnessing with my sister growing up, and a lot of the the kids at my son's school, the challenges that they have in balancing their relationships and what they feel like. I mean, I think a lot of the things I put in there are very just on a human level, not very gender specific. And so I was also kind of mining my own history and things that I'm seeing with my son as an adolescent, where he feels like he needs to be a certain way or dress a certain way, or um, he can't be the same person for two different friend groups. There's a lot of that going on, and so I feel like between the relationship things and just the whole adolescent growing up things that, hopefully these will be universally um, they will connect universally to, female and male readers.
Was there anything that you found particularly challenging about writing this book, that you either had not expected or knew you were going to struggle with going into it?
Yeah, it's the whole paranormal aspects of this because um, I think whenever you write in a genre like this, you kind of have to set up a rule set. Like this can happen when this happens and whatever, and you don't want to accidentally break the rules because your readers are going to call you out on it. You know it. And so for me, the difficult things, she keeps having this vision or this dream of her impending death. And so the moment where, some the her fate that she keeps, like, it's just a scary vision, but like the closer and closer she gets to her birthday, which is when her death is supposed to happen, things keep lining up more and more and making her think that, oh, well, maybe this is actually a premonition of some sort. And so I had to kind of approach it from that standpoint where, at least when I was drawing it, I drew it from that point of the story first, and then I had to go back. But in a way, I also had to make that the canon for the rest of the story, where these visions have to line up with that moment in the story as well. Um, but the tough thing also is that things do change in her vision, and different things affect the vision more than others, and some things or whatever those invisible forces won't let her change um, the things that she's drawing into her comic. Because when the first time she has this dream, she decides, I'm going to draw a comic about it. And then the comic almost becomes the portal between the two worlds, where, at a certain point, she's like, I have to change this because I don't want this to happen. And whatever that force is won't let her change it. So that it keeps peeling up her revisions or erasing them or drawing something else while she's not conscious or in this fugue state or while she's asleep.
I'm curious, as a comic artist, is that one of your fears that somebody's just going to go through and mess up your manuscripts or stop you from making any changes while you're doing your work?
Well, I mean, I do have a fear that like everything that I've written script-wise in Scrivener will somehow go away because I haven't been working on it often. But um I think for me it was like originally when I was writing Olfactory Memory, as I was scripting it out, I clearly felt like, okay, this isn't scary to me anymore. But I love the story, so I pushed forward with it and thinking that, okay, I'll make a different story, my bucket list item. But after I started rewriting it and making it into The Many Misfortunes of Eugenia Wang, there were aspects, and maybe this was the whole making it very specific thing, about making her an aspiring comic artist, that made it scary to me again. Because there are definitely things about not like automatic drawing that which happens in the story that just scare me, that I think are scary, um, things in movies like in the others where they have the fortune teller that is just doing automatic drawing and channeling whatever she's drawing onto the paper that she's writing, or like the little kid drawing in the I think it was in The Ring, where he's drawing the well or whatever, that just scare me. So I'm like, okay, and I'm talking about right now and I'm getting goosebumps. So I don't know if my readers will still think it's scary, but for me, just thinking about what it is, makes it scary to me. So whether or not it scares other people is irrelevant. But for me, this book does check the box of, okay, I fulfilled this bucket list item.
It's difficult. Like something I've heard with horror stories in general is that if the thing that's happening on the screen is not something that would naturally frighten you, then you're probably not going to be scared of it anyway. Like it's going to show up and you're like, oh, well, I'm not worried about the squid monster in the basement. Like I know it's not
Right.
real. It's not going to get me. But if, for instance, you're afraid of heights and your character is constantly leaning over an edge, then you're starting to get a little
Yeah.
anxious because that's what's scary to you.
Right.
So I think it makes
And that
sense.
that's another thing. She is scared of heights. So if you see the cover, she's on the PE rope. And and so that's also something it's a parallel story or a storyline for her that's running through this whole thing. And a lot of it is the the real story is her becoming more courageous in a lot of different ways, not just the whole, you know, being afraid of heights thing. But that's just a parallel storyline.
It brings up an interesting question, which is when you're writing a scary story for children, is there an intentionality behind it for when the kid gets through to the end, the reader gets to the end of the book that they made it through, they succeeded, they survived, and to help build
Yes.
that confidence? Or what else might be behind the audience part of reading these types of books?
I mean, I definitely was very deliberate in the way I wrote the story because I do feel like, I mean, this is kind of a fun time in children's ages to write about because they're going through so many changes. You're going from elementary school to middle school or middle school to high school or right around there, you're going through a lot of changes with your social circles and your self-identity. And you know I always tell people that we as authors, our goal is to torture our protagonists. And and so what part of life is more torture for most of us than middle school, right? So it seems like the perfect time for authors to write about because of that. We're just doing our jobs.
I had a horrible middle school. Honestly, I've always felt like I've tortured my characters. I've had so many readers tell me that I'm so mean to my main characters. It's awful, it's awful, it's awful. I've never sent them to middle school. I've always been like, nope. I'd rather you in a dungeon somewhere. I'm just
As
looking
cruel
back.
as you are, you wouldn't be that cruel, huh?
I've never been that cruel. You just, raised the bar for the expectation of how much more cruel I could actually be to my main characters. Thank you for that moment of clarity. I can now tell my friends I'm actually a nice person. I never made them relive middle school.
Just doing your job.
Man, I'm slacking. I have more trauma to provide.
Yes, exactly. I mean, if you were really cruel, yeah, you would do middle grade.
See, I'm giving everyone a gift. I'm giving them the relief of not having to read that from me. So this is not your first book that you finished. From the first book that you have written, or even the first project you ever sat down, was like, I'm gonna do this, to today. How has your process changed? How has the act of actually creating the book changed? Has it been easier, harder? Did you learn things along the way that made it better, or has it been the same all the way through?
I definitely think my process now has made my storytelling a lot better because I feel like even though I haven't really been what people traditionally call a pantser, because I used to actually run this event here in town. There's a challenge called the 24-hour comic book day challenge, where you write and illustrate a full 24-page comic book in 24 consecutive hours. And I did that for 10 years running. And, I think based on that, where you really have to focus on process a lot, um, I figured out that I'm not really a pantser because a lot of the guys that would come to our event, you'd see how they work and they don't even know what's going to happen in the next panel or the next page. Whereas I'm like, okay, I wrote this story on the spot, but I took the first, half an hour to an hour to actually write a story and figure out what was happening on each page before I drew it. You know? But I think like when I originally was doing stories, um, and I think like I didn't really have a process in mind until I was in college, and most of the times it was just me. I come from a background of comic strips, where you are just writing something funny and you have to have a punchline within the third or fourth panel of a four-panel comic strip. Um, and so really I'd see scenes in that way in really short scenes. So even after I decided, hey, drawing comic books is liberating because you don't have to come out up with a punchline every 3 to 4 panels. I was still thinking of things in very abbreviated scenes. And so I would think of something at 3 in the morning when I'm in college and then get up and write it down. And then so I'd just have these legal pads full of different little scenes and jokes that didn't necessarily relate to each other. But then later on, I would say, okay, how can I shoehorn all of these scenes into one character's chronology? And that's the way I'd write. And even though they were satisfying to me and a lot of readers, there were certain people that would read my work that were never satisfied with my endings. And in retrospect, I'm like, they were totally right. And so once I started kind of thinking of things in terms of like a 3 act play or whatever, um, and I would start thinking of things that way. But in, I always do think of things from a character standpoint. So even though at that time I wasn't thinking of the character first and foremost, um, now I've decided to take that approach and think of the character first before I think of all of these fun little scenes and conflicts they can have with other characters in the stories. And so I'll just brainstorm interesting characters first, and then I'll go ahead and build a, a story around that. Although I can't say that that's exactly what happened with this story. This story, I did think of the plot first, whereas everything that I've been doing other than that, I've been thinking of the characters first. So,
Do you find it easier or harder to be focusing either on plot first versus character first?
um, I don't know. I mean, I think there's definitely certain scenarios that I think of where the plot is going to come first no matter what. But I tend to find that if I think about the characters first, it's really liberating because then the story can kind of go anywhere. And typically the endings are way more satisfying that way because I'm taking the character into consideration first and foremost. And so we're really focusing on that character's journey, as opposed to, okay, I've got to give this character a journey, but shoehorn it into this plot. So, so hopefully that doesn't take away from, my Eugenia Wang story. But I
I
do
know what
feel
you mean.
like because she is based and so many of the characters are based on so many people in my own life and upbringing that that won't be a problem because uh, uh, I'm honoring those character journeys.
Something we've talked a little bit about so far, which kind of just reminded me of what you just said, is this idea of writing what you know. Um, I think some people take it extraordinarily literally, where they go, I can only write about this street that I've lived on, this personal path that I've gone on, because that's the only thing I know. I've never, seen a fire demon, and so I can't write about fire demons. Um, but there is more to that, in my personal opinion, that where writing what you know is also metaphorical.
Oh yeah,
And you can
absolutely.
expand
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I'm all about monsters and fantasy and speculative type of stuff. But in the end, it's always rooted in you know a person that I know. or myself, um, or a setting that I know, or relationships that I've witnessed, or just anything that I've witnessed out there. It's amazing like how many things that I'll experience or see out there that ends up making it into a comic that I've written.
Um, Earlier you mentioned that you did the 24-hour comic. Is that like a literal, like you wake up at 8 a.m. one day and you go until 8 a.m. the next day, or is it
Yes.
how do
Yeah.
you manage something like that?
Um, with a lot of coffee and there was a couple of years where I just ran it, but I didn't participate in it. And those were the toughest years. I think like when I'm actually drawing and creating, it's so much easier to stay up for 24 hours. Not to say that you don't hit a wall at any certain point, but I think it's because, and maybe it's also because of different things I did to myself. Like I would challenge myself to try a new media, or to just to up the bar. Like the first year I did a full 24-page comic book. It wasn't really a comic book. I created a 24-line poem, and so I created basically a picture book, and most of the pages were just a single illustration, um, with my line from my poem in it, and I finished it in 18 hours. So I'm like, you know what? The next year I did it, I'm like, okay, I feel like I kind of cheated that year. So this year we're going to do multiple panels. But then that year, it was pretty much a silent comic. So I'm like, okay, well, I feel like I cheated again because there wasn't enough dialogue. And so every year I kind of changed things. Then one year, that was the first year I did a fully digital comic and drew the whole thing. And I barely finished on time because it was very difficult for me, just learning the technology and figuring out a process. And then there were a couple of years where one year I decided I'm going to do all of this comic in watercolors and ink. And so I had to, like, okay, I'm doing all the washes. I have to let that dry, and then I got to move on to the next page and rough that out, and then I go back and I can do the inks over the ink washes. So there was a lot of process involved there. Um, but I think that's a part of what made it a whole lot easier for me because um, not only was I learning about the process and how to quickly write a satisfying story in a very short period of time and to execute it, but I was learning something new every single year that I was doing it. And by the time that I think I did the watercolor one, we had a massage therapist show up to offer free massages to attendees. And so I had like a half an hour massage, and then I finished like 3 hours early still. And so I went across the street and had breakfast and
Meanwhile, everybody's still out there cramming, trying to
yeah,
get
yeah.
your like eating your eggs.
Uh, and I think that was like really a necessary part of you know, becoming a traditionally published graphic novelist as well is really having a good hold on my process. So even though right now I'm doing everything digitally, I've still learned so much from doing, because even the years that I only ran the 24-hour comic challenge, I would go home and I would do a 24-hour comic because I didn't get to do it that year. So I learned a whole lot about it and brought it into this because when I sat down and thought about like if I took away all of the time that I waited for editorial notes and every step of the process, when I actually thought about how much time I actually spent drawing my comic. Now, granted, the writing aside, this 264 page comic, graphic novel took, I drew it in a calendar year. So, and it was all steps of the process, the roughs, the pencils, the inks, the colors, the lettering, everything, covers, all happened within the span of a calendar year. And I don't think I could have met those deadlines if I hadn't. done the 24-hour comic challenge, and plus I'm a caricature artist. So for me, when I do a live gig, I'm trying to draw each person in about 4 minutes. And so I think that also probably in a way helps me out a little bit. I think it helps me with decision making and making sure that whatever I'm doing with my characters, I'm creating a good silhouette. So it's a quick and easy read for people that are reading my comics, so they don't have to like study my panels to figure out what's going on. They can, you know, see it really quickly, read it, and move on to the next panel, and it doesn't negatively impact the pacing of my story.
When did you come up with the idea of doing the 24-hour comic, or is that something that you
No,
joined in?
that was Scott McCloud. So he started doing it, and then I think the first time I did it, I hosted it at my house with a bunch of friends, and we did what was called at that time, and I forget what community it was. It might have been a community that I belonged to called Sequential Tart, but they proposed the idea of doing a mini comic challenge where you did 12 pages in 24 hours. And so the first time we did it, I just did 12 pages and I was like, no, that was way too easy. And so we're like, okay, even though I don't feel like I draw really fast, next year we're going to do the full blown thing. And fortunately, there was almost always like a comic book store or a gallery or something that was willing to stay open for 24 hours for our event and hosted it for us.
Something that it was interesting while you're describing it, because I'd never heard of a 24-hour comic before, but I've definitely heard of writing sprints or
Right,
different types of writing things where it's like, all right, you have to do a true drabble of 100 words. You have to do 1,000 words, 5,000 words, 10,000 words, and it has to hit that word mark. And then being able to put it out in a certain amount of speed. And so it's a similar variation for the prose, although I am curious,
yeah,
like,
like NaNoWriMo, right?
yeah, but I feel like with Nano, the 50,000 words in a month is definitely something that a lot of people really aimed for. My problem with it was that as an adult fantasy writer, 50,000 words is barely half the book. It's like,
Well,
I've
then
seen,
you can write half of your book.
yeah, and it's just funny 'cause it's like, write a novel in a month. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's more of like twice that.
right.
And
But
so
that's just a goal.
it's a goal to reach. But I am curious. I wonder how much you could get people sitting in a room, how much writing you could do in 24 hours nonstop, or
Right,
because it's a different amount of commitment. Not commitment, maybe that's the wrong word, but the word count is very different with a comic book versus a
right,
um,
right.
prose, but you also have all of the art. So I'm curious now where the difference might lie or how much you could physically type
Yeah.
without getting carpal tunnel.
I mean, so much of what we do is, if you've ever seen like comic adaptations of novels, um, obviously not all of the text makes it into the comic unless you do like they did one that was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, which was really a novella because I think it was like 100 pages. And the publisher, I forget who the publisher was, they did, God, it must have been like a 20 book series where their constraint was they were not going to um, exclude any of his text. All of the text in the novel made it into the comic, which made it a really horrible reading experience, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I can see that.
But more times than not, the adaptations,
I bet the
they
royalties are
include the
really good though.
dialogue, but if you can draw it instead of describing it, then that's what you do instead, you know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's definitely not an apples to apples thing. And um yeah, I don't know what more to say about that. But there are challenges like that for like creating stage plays, and there was I think like a 48-hour movie making challenge like that as well. But you had to actually film it too.
It's a lot of people involved at that point. That's
Yeah.
the hardest part,
Whereas
getting
I think
everyone to
with
pay attention.
the play, I think it was just writing it. I don't know if it was actually performing
Producing it.
it or making the wardrobe and the props. I don't think that would have been possible.
No, those poor costume department people struggling to sew the dresses together in 5 seconds
Right.
or less.
You know, if it's just like a one person stage play, then that might make it a little bit easier, but still.
Um, so when you're not doing it for 24 hours straight, how many hours a day do you commit to working on comics?
Well, the funny thing is, I haven't done that challenge in a couple of decades now, and that's for a reason, because I don't know that I could physically handle it anymore. Um, and in fact, I think when I started working on this book, my goal, based on my deadlines, I got this really great spreadsheet that I forget who created it, but my agent passed it on to me, where you actually plan in, personal days, sick days, and things like that, so that you can kind of calculate what a reasonable deadline is for you. And that's what I'll plug in before I send it back to my editor. Um, to let them know because we never meet our deadlines. Whatever's in our contract, we always blow by it because they never calculate the time that they're sitting on it to give me editorial notes. And so so once they get back to me with notes, the next question is always, how soon do you think you'll be able to get this next step of the project done? And um, so I always give myself a little wiggle room. And so when I was working on this book and I was supposed to start on my pencils, but we were already past the end of the pencil deadline. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm working digitally. So a lot of what I would be doing in my pencils and inks are a little bit redundant. So let's just go straight to inks. And so I was thinking that okay, I can do about 2 pages a day and give myself all the personal time that I need to, you know, do family stuff and, you know, exercise and things like that. But when I started inking it, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna get ahead. I'm gonna do 4 pages, and that was taking me about I think 10 to 12 hours a day. And the thing that was bad was I started hurting my hand too. I was starting to get some carpal tunnel issues. And so I had to scale back to 2 and say, okay, even if I blow through these 2 pages really quick, I just for self-care, I'm stopping. And that made all the difference in the world. Then my pain went away and I had a lot more life balance that way.
No, I've definitely done the same thing where I've had a writing project that I wanted to get done, and I was like, I can just do 10,000 words a day, no problem. And then the
Yeah.
repetitive stress of just doing this
Yeah, yeah.
that
I
long,
mean,
I
maybe when I was in my 20s, I could have, hacked it, but in your 50s, yeah, it there's no way.
well, it leads me to an important question because it's I for both of us, although I feel like artists have it worse. Like, are there specific stretches that you do to make sure that you're not hurting your hands or that you're taking care of your tools, I
Yeah.
should say.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely try to, do yoga at least, once or twice a week, but like things that I can do are just like spreading your hands apart and prayer pose and pushing them together, doing them upside down. There's a couple of other things that I've learned where you kind of push your thumb pad out like this and then reverse that and then just stretches going in this direction,
Where you're spreading
shaking
your
them
fingers
out.
all out.
Yeah, that helps. I also bought this, which is the hand massager that you stick your hand in.
It's so high
So
tech looking.
yeah, and that way I can also cosplay as an anime character shooting lasers out of my hand or whatever.
That's what it looks like. I'll put it in the description in case people are curious.
Yeah, it's just called a Lunix, Lunix. Um,
And does it actually help?
yeah, hand massagers LX3. Yeah, it does help. At least on a temporary standpoint. Like so like if I'm experiencing any sort of uh pain, it doesn't have to be acute, but it's something that obviously I need to take a break. It's good for that. But I do feel like not going past my self-imposed maximums is important too, which unfortunately I didn't have the luxury of when I started doing my colors, because I had inadvertently promised I was going to do 4 pages of colors a day because, they're the scenes where they're at nighttime or in her visions, it's just, monochromatic blue or monochromatic red. And when I did the sample pages for the color test, I wanted to make sure to include all of those. So I fooled myself into thinking that I could color them faster than I could. And then there were some, stretches where it's all full color. And unfortunately, I didn't have the luxury of not doing 4 pages a day. And yeah, so there was some recovery time that was required in December. So I finished it by the end of November, and December was a big recovery month for me.
Super important to take care of your hands.
Yeah, yep. And get
Um,
back to the gym because I skipped a lot of gym that month.
Sometimes, it's a balance. You gotta put a little bit of energy here at one time, then you can recoup it later.
Yeah. But at 50, it's hard to bounce back and regain lost ground.
Just the amount of dedication you can put into it.
Yes.
Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you one final question, which is, you were a stockbroker for 13 years, but then you became a full-time graphic novelist. Why didn't you remain a stockbroker? What made you feel confident that you could be a full-time graphic novelist? When did that switch take place, and how did you
Um,
feel confident with it?
so during the last, I think, 4 or 5 years of being a stockbroker, um, I started going to comic book conventions to promote my comics. So while I was a stockbroker, I finished my first 3 comic books, my first graphic novel, and I started going out there to promote myself. So in the process of doing that, I learned quite a bit about what some of my fellow comic artists were doing to successfully promote their work. So I felt like I was learning a lot on that end. But also on the flip side, as a stockbroker, I was learning a whole lot about things that when I became a full-time artist, I was able to take into that part of my career, which were things like reading contracts. As you can imagine, any financial industry is highly litigious and you have to read prospectuses and things like that. So it kind of gave me a good idea of, when I was looking at these standardized artist contracts and these books that I bought, that what each part of it really meant. Doesn't mean that anything that I was preparing on my own was necessarily, watertight or anything like that. But I wasn't going to hire a lawyer for something that was only, you know, a couple $100 freelance job or something like that. I just wanted to make sure that I could prepare something if they didn't have a contract on their end that um, had us come to a collective meeting of the minds. So that way their expectations and my expectations were the same or very similar. Um, and the one thing that I can say is that in spite of the fact that of all of my artist friends out there trying to do this for a living, I don't know of one of them that didn't at least get screwed over once. I have not because of that. And then the other thing that's helped me a lot was just dealing with clients. So, as a stockbroker, I have a book of clients, and I had to do quite a bit of public speaking as well because I was teaching towards the end of my career. I was also a staff member at the firm that I lived or that I worked for that was teaching how to use day trading software. So I was, teaching classes of students how to, do things like read charts and use the software and things like that. And so I think that all has helped me in my own career as a freelance artist, a comic book artist, graphic novelist, in all the different ways that you could think of, as and caricature artist as well. So, but in on top of that, I didn't really leave the industry. They laid me off, and the brokerage industry is like a bad relationship. You actually don't know how bad it is until you get out of it. So I was actually pretty happy doing what I was doing and then coming home and drawing for 3 or 4 hours a night, and then, repeating it every single day. Um, but then I didn't realize like what a lose-lose situation that industry was until I got out. Um, and so I didn't really want to get back in. Plus, like there wasn't really any like I left a situation where I was not I was actually not dealing with my own clients. I was um getting a salary and a bonus on top of that. And so most of the opportunities that were available for me were me probably, 100% commission again, which is how I started in the industry. Um, and that was another thing. So when I started in the industry, I was like that boiler room cold caller. So I spent the first 3 years of my life on the phone, cold calling people out of the phone book, out of like old leads, and and you get a lot of rejection. And so in the publishing industry, it's important to expect that you're going to get rejected a lot. And so like in the whole querying process, even though it seemed like I checked all the boxes, I'm, a um, uh, underheard voice as an Asian American. I was an illustrator and an author. So it seems like, that's what the industry was looking for. I had to query 75 send out 75 agents to land with my current agent that I have. So there was a lot of rejection along the way. And I know that 75 isn't very many rejections in today's day and age. Like a lot of my agent mates were in the 300s as far as their rejections before they got signed by my agent. So that all
Definitely a
prepared
difficult
me. And then, of
industry.
course, I needed to have support at home too, because once I went full time as an illustrator, um, uh, I really describe my job as leeching off of my wife. She still provides me with my health insurance. And I think the first year that I was trying to do this full time in all of the different ways that I was, and I wasn't teaching at that time, mind you. I think I made maybe $10,000 that year, most of which, well, and actually I lost money because I spent more on convention travels. And then eventually I started teaching. And then the tough thing about that was like all of these fans that I'd made at the conventions for my writing and my comics kind of went away because they expect you to have something new every year. And I didn't because I was working so much. Like I was teaching summer camps, after school programs, doing freelance and going to comic book conventions. And I didn't really have any time at that point to actually work on my own projects anymore. So that was definitely a time where I didn't have life balance because I wasn't working on my passion projects. So that was something that I definitely needed to do. And that didn't happen until I went on sabbatical from teaching. So like right now, I'm technically on sabbatical from teaching sequential art at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, which I've been on sabbatical for 2 years. And the only reason that I'm able to also teach at the Cuttlefish Academy is because it's, for the most part, online self-guided classes that people can take. And unless they sign up for additional coaching from me, um, there's no time commitment on my end. So,
Do you feel like you're in a good place right now with how things are going?
Pretty much, but it seems like every time I get a book advance, it all goes away because something in life unexpected happens. Like we went on vacation, which we were expecting, and my wife fell and broke her shoulder. And so we had all these medical bills that were unexpected. And then this past year, my dog ended up um, having to have a leg amputated because of cancer, and that was unexpected. And then later in the year, got attacked by another neighborhood dog, and we had to rush him to the emergency vet, and that was also unexpected.
I'm
And so it seems
sorry.
like every time I have an advance, it completely disappears and goes away. You know, not to mention all of those things like, um, you know, major car bills, and then we had to have some of our central air and heating fixed this year, and our hot water heater is still on the fritz. So
Life is just not letting up, eh?
no, no, not at all. Um, yeah, this year has not been easy on me, even though it should have been.
The many misfortunes of Stan Yan.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I don't know. I don't know about this.
Well, before I let you go, is there anything that we haven't had a chance to talk about that you would like to talk about?
Um, well, oh yeah. So anyway, if anyone is interested in supporting my book, I have a street team called Team Misfortune. And so if you go to eugeniawangcomic.com, there's like a link that you can get to where you can join my street team, and possibly, oh, you can definitely get a bunch of free stuff, but you can also possibly win merchandise as well, like Team Misfortune t-shirts and things like that, a
That sounds
mug,
fantastic.
whatever.
I'll
Yes.
put the link in the description for everyone to find it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. It was so lovely to have you today.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for having an interest enough in interviewing me.
Absolutely. That's it for this week's episode of Lindsey Byrd in Writing is Hard. You can find out more about Stan Yan, the many misfortunes of Eugenia Wang, as well as how to join his street team in the description. If you enjoyed this content, please do like, share, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you more. Bye for now.